how do you prefer to be introduced when it comes to your art? You want to be introduced as a graffiti artist, as a writer, as a tagger, as a street artist, just an artist? Like, how do you prefer to be introduced?
Always a good question. Definitely not a street artist because they're two separate entities, two separate worlds. If I had to choose one, I like the artist, but I was also a graffiti artist also. But at the same time, before I was a graffiti artist, I was an artist. So it kind of goes back and forth between graffiti artists and artists. Also, before I was a graffiti artist, I was a graffiti writer, which is kind of like the step before you become a graffiti artist.
Yeah.
So if I were to choose one, probably right now in my career as an artist, but I don't mind when someone slips in that, oh, you were a graffiti artist. I mean, the answer is yes. Or do you still do graffiti? Well, the answer is no, but my art is completely relevant to that style.
Right.
Right.
Do you think it matters if somebody says, like, if somebody introduces you as, hey, this is my friend Nick, he's a graffiti artist, do you think it changes people's perception of you?
Yes, because of just the term graffiti, it automatically has someone thinking, oh, wow, he still does it.
Mm.
Maybe they don't know that I have graduated from that past, or, I have, my art is related to it, but it's the natural progression. Mm. So if someone introduces me as, oh, yes, Nick Fury, the graffiti artist, I don't shy away from that. But if someone says Nick Fury, the artist, then that's cool too. But I guess it depends on what kind of setting it is. If it's in a hip hop setting, oh yes, I welcome Nick Fury, the graffiti artist, because that's what it calls for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. In some crowds, in some settings, it would be problematic to be introduced as a graffiti artist first because they're going to have connotations of like it's illegal, or some people don't like graffiti.
Right.
So that can be detrimental to you, but at the same time, on the flip side of that, it can be beneficial. It's like, oh, he was a graffiti artist. He's got real street cred.
Exactly. So it kind of works both ways. It depends on where I'm at, who I'm talking with, what event I'm in, where I'm showing, what gallery I'm in. But it usually comes up every now and then, and I don't shy away from it because it was my past, and I was doing that at one point of time. But it depends if I'm in a meeting and it's all suits and it's very corporate. If that subject doesn't come up, then it just doesn't come up. I don't volunteer that information. Say, oh, well, yes, I was a graffiti artist, because you never know what kind of impact graffiti has made on someone. Maybe within that group there was a developer, and maybe his property value went down or dropped, or he had to hire professional graffiti removers, and there goes $5,000, $10,000 that he had to come out of pocket. So I kind of stay away from that. So, I feel the crowd, if they embrace it, then it's beneficial. But if it's not, then I just kind of stay away from that.
Cool. You said that you definitely don't like to be introduced as a street artist. What's the difference for you as a street artist versus a writer or just an artist? What's the problem with street artists?
The difference is one is the time. So graffiti artists or graffiti in Chicago pretty much started in the early 80s, extremely early 80s, and the term street art wasn't around. It wasn't used. There may have been artists who were doing that practice of what people consider street art, but at that particular moment in the 80s, we were just graffiti writers and then graffiti artists. So it's completely separate. Graffiti writers or graffiti artists write for other graffiti writers or graffiti artists. So it was something that was by us and for us. So we were writing for us. So we didn't care what was going on in the outside world. There were people that were looking in, and if you didn't understand it, you just didn't understand it. So we weren't making any political statements, anything that relates to religion or to uplift or whatever. It was just something that we wanted to do, and we did it. It was writing for us, so it was our thing. Who was up the most, whose name was up the most. So it was a very exclusive thing that was for us. So also graffiti is also based on a letter style. So if I was to do something on the wall, it would be my name, and that's pretty much about it. Maybe there's a background, characters that are involved. There may be a message, but 99.9% of the times is zero message. Street art, on the other hand, may involve something that's current, a current event. They're trying to make an impact as far as political statements or political things. Things are related to religion, maybe sports, what's happening in the city, to uplift or just to get the word out as far as being impactful. So it's a very different, it's a very different medium, and just it's very different as far as what takes place in graffiti and street art.
Yeah, that's a helpful distinction. I want to go back just to get a sense of, like, before you even got involved in graffiti, just what was it like growing up? Like, what's your story, man? Where are you from? Where were you born? What was your childhood like?
I grew up in Chicago, in the Hyde Park area. I moved around in different locations in the Hyde Park area, so I'm considered a South Sider. I had a very normal childhood. My mother and father they kind of let me explore art, which I kind of credit them. I was kind of fortunate that they didn't say, oh, well, you can't be an artist because it's not going to make any money, or you can't do this because, so they didn't stop or try to steer me in another direction as far as being creative. So my grandmother and father, when I was maybe 4 years old, brought me a Lego set. So I didn't want to play with anything else but my Legos. And that, from that point on, that started. So I wanted to be an architect. So ever since I was 4 years old, I wanted to be an architect. So as time went on, I kind of took various classes, art classes, and found that there was a little bit more besides being an architect, or I was just exposed to something a little bit more, as far as something as I had more of a variety of art, I could say. So then my path changed, but it was always art related, and is still art related today.
Cool. Where'd you go to school? What was your school like? Like, when you got together with your friends when you guys were kids, where'd you meet up? Where'd you go? What'd you do?
Well, when I was in high school, I still wanted to be an architect, so I maxed out all of the drafting classes. So then I took more of a fine arts class. So then that led me into the fine art world. So I took all those classes. I maxed out all the fine art classes, and the art teacher was cool at the time. He created classes and projects for me. Otherwise, I would have finished all my art classes in maybe junior high. I mean, in my junior year of high school. But prior to junior year, enters some people that I met that got me more involved in graffiti. But to take it a couple of years before that, when I was in 8th grade, that's when I was really exposed to it. So there was a person that came from New York named Sean. So he was writing on everything. Every time we would go to camp or take the school bus to go to the Y, he was always writing his name. And we were saying, well, what is that? And he explained it to us. So he said, oh, well, this is graffiti from New York. I'm a writer. So that kind of led me to becoming a graffiti writer and led to become a graffiti artist. So right before that, well, while that was happening, a couple of months after that, there was a documentary called Star Wars, which came on TV here in Chicago on Channel 11, and everybody watched it. And then just like overnight, everyone that was an artist was a graffiti writer. So I was kind of involved maybe a couple of months before, but not having an impact as that documentary came out. So it was just something that was introduced to me, and it was just a very basic level. But when the documentary came out, then it just kind of like all worked together. It just happened. Sean and I just happened to meet at that particular time. A couple of months after that, the documentary came out, so everything kind of worked, and it just kind of exploded overnight in Chicago.
Yeah. When did you first see like graffiti on the street? Like, what was the experience like? Where did you see it? What did you think when you saw it?
Well, I would always see writing in bathrooms, but it wasn't the traditional graffiti as far as being part of the hip-hop culture. It's pretty much the same when you go into a bathroom now in a restaurant or Park District bathroom or in a library. You just see someone's name scribbled on the wall, or it's some funny-looking character or some obscene message or whatever. So to be technical, that was probably the first sense of me seeing graffiti, but it wasn't recognized as graffiti as a subculture or in any type of artistic or any type of expressive way. So when I first saw graffiti was from Sean, but more in another sense was more of the documentary when that came out. So that's when I was pretty much exposed to it. Kind of going back, like I stated before, I would always see it like written, bathrooms or someone's name or something that's gang related or whatever. But I didn't recognize that as graffiti, as part of the soul culture. So when Sean introduced me, and then when the documentary came out, and then we began to do it. So that's when I kind of saw it on a more creative level of when I was here in Chicago, and when everyone was doing it, or all of my friends were doing it, then that's when I saw it on that level.
Tell me about your first time writing, like in public. What was it like? What were you thinking?
Probably first time, if I can remember, extremely nervous, and even years after that, still being nervous. I've always had the mindset or the thought of, if you feel comfortable doing this, then there's something wrong. So it's almost like when a performer goes on stage, at some point, whether it's the first year, second year, third year, some point he still has to feel nervous, and there's nothing wrong with that. Even if someone has been performing for 30 years, I still think that there should be some nervous there. Otherwise, it just doesn't work out somehow. It just doesn't feel right or whatever. I mean, just the thought of having someone look at you on stage or in some type of arena or some type of setting, I just think that you cannot get used to that. I mean, you can get comfortable and you can think about other things to kind of deflect your nervousness. Maybe you have a ritual before you go on stage or whatever, but so it's sort of the same principle. So even the first time all the way to maybe the last time that I did that, I still felt that nervousness. I mean, after a while you get comfortable, but it will be there. It's always there, and if it goes away, then there's something else that's going on that should tell you to stop or reevaluate your thinking or your mindset. So it's probably had never died down.
So I imagine your first piece was your name. What'd you do for your first thing?
As far as graffiti goes, I started off as a graffiti writer, so I was writing years before I started to do a piece. So I pretty much started in basically buildings that were abandoned buildings, just to kind of practice, because you don't want to have a bad tag. Yep. You don't want it to look bad. You want it to look like you have some type of experience. So you don't want to come out as being a toy. So you want to look like you have some style and at the same time some experience. I mean, even though at one point everyone had to start off at one point. You know, everyone had to have that first time when they tagged or they wrote on something. So yeah, it's always been that way. So for a while I was writing, considered being a writer, and from that point, then you kind of, it's just a natural progression of being a writer, and you would maybe that's the public transportation, or maybe there are trucks, but never, it was almost kind of like an unwritten rule not to do it on personal property. No one's homes, no one's cars, or anything like that. That's why even today that rule somewhat applies, at least for the personal cars, but you still see it on people's property, which the major complaint is the property value being dropped down.
Yeah. When you first started writing, who did you tell about it? Like, did your parents know? Did your friends know? Were you trying to keep it kind of a secret? How did it work?
Well, of course, my parents didn't know at all. I mean, it was something that we kind of kept from them. Of course, my friends knew, because we were kind of all hung out together. So one thing led to another. But my immediate friends knew, and then by meeting other graffiti writers, and then, you just kind of, within time, just keep meeting people in different crews, and you join crews or you create a crew. So then your network becomes larger. Now, I did have friends at the time who had no idea that I was doing that, and we didn't tell them, because once again, it was more exclusive. It was something that was for us and only for us, and we wasn't thinking of any outside sources or any outside people, or telling another person that. It was just something we just didn't do.
Yeah. So, what were you first writing? What was your name back then?
I've had a couple of names, and that's kind of common for a graffiti writer, but the first name that I was using was Echo, so E-C-H-O. Mm-hmm. So after echo became fear, F-E-A-R, and some other names after that. But one thing that I did notice that it's always an alter ego from another alter ego.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually takes place of being confident, and you want to kind of retire that name because you've changed your style, of just for whatever reason you wanted to adapt to another name, or you wanted to try something different. So majority of graffiti writers had or have more than one name. So I had more than one name.
Okay. Yeah, what's the, I mean, that's one of the most fascinating things about writing to me, is that it's always a pseudonym, it's always an alter ego.
Right.
And there's so much work, particularly on the trains.
Yeah.
Like, I want this name out everywhere.
Right.
But I also, so I want the fame, but I want the fame for the alter ego.
Yes.
And I'm hiding my own identity at the same time. There's
Right.
such a strange paradox. Dude, what do you think about that? I mean, what is it with the names?
That's a very good question and good statement. So, well, for one, it's illegal. So you're committing, it's an action that's illegal. So of course you don't want your real name, and you don't write your real name, or you don't want people to know. So that's probably the number one reason why people adapt to another name and change their name. Now, usually when someone changes their name, there's a there could be many possibilities of why someone has just retired a name or moved on to another name. Maybe they got caught, and so once you're caught, you're put into a book.
Yeah.
So if a particular graffiti writer had this name and he got caught, then that name is marked. So the next time whoever sees that name, they can identify and say, oh, well, you did this after you were caught, so now we got to charge you, with, or the punishment is more severe. But I like what you said about the graffiti writer wants to be recognized, in a very bad way. You want to be recognized, but you don't want your true identity to be recognized.
Yeah.
Which is I like that. It's real fascinating. But that's pretty much how it was. Those are part of the unofficial rules to have another name, and it's just an alter ego.
Tell me a little bit about like the just sort of writing and graffiti as an art form. Like, can talk a little bit about where it gets done, the different kinds of graffiti, the different styles, things like that. So if we could just start, like, the different places where graffiti culture is looking to have their name out there. Like, it seems to gravitate, no matter where in the world you go, it seems to gravitate around the same kinds of things.
Exactly. One is the public transit system. Okay. For me, that was free advertising. So here in Chicago, there are a number of train lines. I didn't have to go to another part of Chicago to get my name out, because if I wrote on a particular train line, my name will travel throughout the whole route. So if I was a West Side writer at that particular time, the train ran from the West Side all the way to the South Side. So I didn't have to go to the South Side to write on the South Side to get my name on the South Side. I can stay on the West Side. So my name would travel all the way west, downtown, and then to the South Side. Also, sometimes the trains or the transit system would switch lines. So there may be a particular car or a bus that will move to another garage or to another yard, and then there goes my name. My name would follow the bus or the train. So I really didn't have to travel around too much. But if I wanted my name to be up more, then I would have to do that. So there were other writers who would do that. They would travel around to different areas. It's a term that's what you call to be all city.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an option. Sometimes there were freights that were involved, but not that much in the 80s. But now it's becoming very popular because I think because of the risk, there's less of a risk of someone being caught if you're doing a freight versus being in a transit yard, as far as a bus yard or a train yard. There are cameras all around. There's fencing. There's barbed wire. There's transit workers walking around at any given time. So the risk level is a lot higher. Mm-hmm. But also within a graffiti artist or the graffiti world, you get more credibility being in a train yard or being on some type of transit line versus having your name on a freight. And the reason is it's less risk for the freights and a lot more risk for the transit, the public transit system. So the higher the risk, the more fame that you're going to get. So, there's nothing wrong with bombing freights, but to kind of separate the two, that's how I would separate the two. I mean, of course, the act of graffiti is doing graffiti, but and to me, a writer that's doing a whole car, a transit whole car, would it's more impressive than someone doing a whole car like on a freight line. Yeah. So in one particular freight train, there may be 200 cars. Maybe there's one conductor, maybe he has an assistant, maybe there's someone that's in the back of the train. But once those trains have stopped, chances are that person is not going to inspect 200 cars, so he's just going to sit there. So and a graffiti writer or graffiti artist has all the time in the world. So the risk level is not as high, and you don't get that. Your credibility is not the same as a graffiti writer going into the transit cars.
Yeah. So the it's interesting to me though that there's such a clear hierarchy of
right.
like what gets you credibility as a writer. It seems, and it seems to always follow the same progression too, right? You start with your name, you start with writing, you start with tagging, then you start doing pieces that's still just words, but then they get more style added to them, and then there's kind of grows. Then it becomes the trick of getting it bigger or in an all city, or I mean, how did those rules develop? Because it feels like it developed in a really organic way, but like, what were the conversations like? How did that get enforced? How did that come to be? Do you know?
Well, since it was all new for us, but we took pretty much everything from New York. There were books that were out. Subway Art is a book, and Star Wars, Wild Style. So we kind of took a lot of those rules and kind of regulations from those things because we didn't have anything to compare it to. So we used those as guides. And of course, we are geographically in a different location besides New York. So as time went on, we began to kind of develop our own things or how we went about graffiti writing or whatever. But a huge percent is directly from New York. So whatever happened there, we would kind of adapt to it. We may change a couple of things because it's the Chicago way,
Mm.
or depending on certain crews or certain people, we kind of changed it. But it was pretty much rules that were kind of implemented, but we will have these all-city meetings. So all the graffiti writers in Chicago would meet at a specific location, and then that's where we would talk about the rules or just certain things to do and not to do. So it was pretty much kind of word of mouth. We got a lot of things from New York, and then as we went on, we kind of adapted. So that's how those kind of unwritten rules started.
Who would convene those all city like, how did that work? Were there people that everybody agreed were leaders in the movement, or how did that happen?
It was word of mouth. We didn't have, there was nothing to communicate as far as on a massive level. We didn't have cell phones. We couldn't text. There was no type of social media at that time. So it was just kind of spread. So if an all-city meeting was called, since we kind of somewhat knew each other or knew someone that knew each other, so we were just a couple steps away from the next graffiti writer. So that's how we all kind of stayed in contact. There were a lot of graffiti writers in schools, in high school, so it would just kind of spread out. So if there was an all-city meeting called, of course some people wouldn't get the message for whatever reason, but pretty much word would get out real quick, and we would end up at this particular location and just discuss and just hang out and just talk about certain things in Chicago that related to graffiti.
It seems like, from everybody that I've talked to, that when graffiti as a movement took off in Chicago, it was almost exclusively run by young people.
Yeah.
I mean, which for me is a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
That there's this entire movement within art history that was dominated by really young people.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Do you think that's, why is that important in the history of graffiti to recognize how do you think it changed or made graffiti what it is, that it was such a youth movement?
Well, at that time, a lot of people were preteen, 12, 13, 14, when people started. But it was just something so vibrant, and it was our thing. So we just ran with it. It was something that we controlled. It was something that we did. We didn't have any outside source telling us what to do, or we didn't have any outside entity rules. It wasn't official, so we can make up our rules as we went, and we adapted. But it was just something. It was something extremely vibrant, and also it was part of the hip hop culture. So it was within the elements of hip hop. We just happened to be one part of the elements of hip hop that was illegal, but it also made it for us. It made it more fun or more vibrant at that time, because it was something that you have to get away with it. Okay, so versus another element of hip hop, which all the other elements of hip hop are all legal. But it was something it's an unexplained feeling back then. It was something that we took to, something that we controlled. We had rules, unofficial rules. We made up rules. And it was something it's art related, and it's something, just the fact of combining something that's illegal with a culture which almost made it a subculture.
Mm-hmm.
So it was art, just the term that's, just to say art is illegal or illegal art, it makes you think like, wow, how is art illegal? And then why would it be illegal? What are you doing to make art illegal? So it was something that was very, very vibrant and soulful at a very young age, and it was our thing, and it wasn't criminal as in what someone thinks it would be criminal. I mean, yes, the act of graffiti is, committing an illegal act, but when you use the word illegal and criminal, it's kind of different. But it was just something that was, it was fun, it was youthful, it was something that we controlled. It could have gone forever, but it just didn't.
Do you think the fact that it was illegal and dangerous and countercultural was part of what drew a lot of kids to it? I mean, it's just the excitement of it?
Oh, yes, of course. Just the risk of going into a train yard, or the risk of riding on a bus, or riding on a building, or riding on something that wasn't yours, or just something that made it illegal. I guess maybe you could say it was something that was very vibrant about that. Just the risk level, your heart racing and just being nervous, and you looking around and being in the dark. So it made you. It made you this creative criminal, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But it was part of yourself, but the name kind of transforms you into this alter ego, which could be some type of like superhero, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a possibility that a lot of graffiti writers could have had an outer body experience, sort of. Well, yeah, it is me, but I'm using another name, so it's not really me. But myself is not really committing this. It's the name that's committing this. So,
yeah, I think so there's a difference, I think, a pretty big difference between the self-understanding of writers and the understanding of writers in the broader culture.
right.
And part of that is, especially when the movement was getting started, writing was for other writers.
Right.
And you wanted everybody to see it, but you really mostly wanted other writers to see it.
Exactly.
And you didn't care if any, like, especially with the crazy wild style stuff that was coming out, you didn't care if anybody else could read it.
Yeah.
You could read it, and that's
Yeah.
what mattered. And so there was this relationship to being illegal and insular that was exciting, but that I think in the broader culture, because it was illegal and not something that people could understand, the criminal element of it, I think, was a bigger part of the public's understanding of graffiti than it was
Right.
for writers. It was seen as more dangerous or more problematic
Mhm.
than I think writers, sort of understood or valued. But I think there was also a relationship between gangs and gang affiliation and writing that was hard for people outside of the community to understand.
Of course.
So anyway, I'm just curious, what's your thought about the relationship between gangs and gang writing versus graffiti writers? I mean, there's some overlap there, obviously, but what do you think about that whole mix and how it's a different kind of criminality than just vandalism?
Well, of course, the public or people who didn't understand just grouped us all into one area or one section or just one problem. So part of the overlap can come in different forms. So maybe someone who was doing graffiti, maybe that was his way of kind of escaping that gang life. For others, it was there was different avenues or different routes that different writers would take or try to escape or whatever. But what kind of groups us together as far as like gang writing and graffiti writing is one simple thing: is there's the fact that it's illegal. So majority of gang writing at that time was to mark out a specific territory. So it could be another situation that the gangs were writing for other gangs, that hey, this is my territory, and that's pretty much about it. It's not considered part of the hip-hop soul culture because someone may not consider that artistic. So now enters the graffiti writer. So his world is different from the gang writing or that gang life. So the graffiti writer is writing more on of a personal creative expression and writing for other writers, not necessarily writing for the gang member, is just writing for other writers, as in that gang member is writing his name or his affiliation for another gang member just to mark out a specific territory. So there could be some similarities. They're clearly different. You have someone that's in a gang who's writing their gang name or their crew or clique, versus someone who's doing it more of in a cultural expression way, which is completely different. So the overlap comes in is when the public the public puts us all in that category, and they don't understand, so they just see, oh, there's writing on the wall. They don't know what it is, they don't know what it means, and they probably don't care about that. They just see it as, oh, okay, this is a bad area. Yes, that's gang writing, so my property is going to drop down. What has this neighborhood turned to? Am I going to get hurt in this neighborhood? Is it safe in this neighborhood? So different. Pretty much those same things may come into a person's mind when they just see writing on the wall. But it's clearly different. It just takes that person to understand it. Some people find a way to understand it, and then some people don't. So sometimes the city or the area has different programs as far as doing murals that you're using spray paint. So you have some people who have done research or who has separated it or is making an attempt to separate it. And there are others who still haven't done that.
Yeah, I think for me it's one of the more interesting elements of the sort of history of graffiti, but also the history of hip-hop that, I mean, if you talk to a lot of writers, they would say in their early life, you know, for many of them, getting involved with graffiti crews was an alternative to gang life. It was an escape to get away from gang life. And same with people that were involved in the music side of hip-hop or the breaking side of hip-hop. But in popular imagination or in popular culture, that was all related to gang activity because there was some overlap.
Right.
So for me, it's just kind of one of those fascinating things. And what I wonder is if graffiti writers weren't so insular, if they weren't only writing for each other and only putting up their names, if they had wanted to be understood, would that have been easier for people in the broader culture to separate those things out?
I guess in a sense, yes, of course, if you are a graffiti writer and if you're not a gang member, then you don't want to be labeled as a gang member. So, of course, you want to be separated. And if you are in a gang, it probably doesn't hurt to be labeled as a graffiti writer. So it's that gang member, they're not gaining anything and they're not losing anything. But for the graffiti writer, the graffiti writer, if he was in a gang, then he would probably be labeled different. You know, it's looked at, is viewed different completely. Even though, this is after someone has done their research and they understand the two different worlds. So there's that separation, and the graffiti writer would probably want to remain separate if they don't have any affiliation with that, with the gangs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so deeply embedded in hip hop culture, which is as misunderstood, I guess, or almost as misunderstood as graffiti writing. But I heard someone describe graffiti as the advertising arm of hip hop. What do you think about that?
I guess you can say that because it's something that's it's extremely visual. We're not relying on anything else. We're not relying on sound. We're not relying on other things to get the message across. So what makes it the advertising is sort of what we're doing. It's getting your name out. So and the medium that we're using and the different ways to get your name out. So if you want your name to get out, then you have to do certain things, or you have to write on certain things for your name to travel or for someone to view it. So as I said before, I viewed writing on public transportation as free advertisement. So the term the advertising arm for hip hop. If you understand hip hop, then you would understand. Then that statement could be true. But a lot of people don't understand or don't know that graffiti is part of hip hop. But for the ones that do understand it and they did their research, then I guess that could be a pretty fair statement.
Following along those lines, like there was a big pushback from in New York with Mayor Ed Koch and then with Mayor Daley and the graffiti blasters and like everybody against the vandalism. And part of that, I think, was this idea that came out of New York around the same time of this broken window theory, which basically was about a couple of things. One is little crimes like jumping the turnstile can lead to bigger crimes.
Exactly.
Or that if you see a house that has a broken window, it means the neighborhood's dilapidated, so then you can then crime is more likely to happen. So the idea then was, let's crack down on all these little things in order to make everything feel safer. So I mean, before we get into the sort of the politics, I guess, of that whole
Right.
idea, like, what did the crackdown on graffiti look like to you as somebody that was writing?
Well, at that time, if you were caught, majority of the charges were considered misdemeanors. You may pay a fine, you may do community service. So that's how we kind of looked at that, and we were all minors at that time, so we would be charged as a minor. If you were writing and you were over 21, then it changes everything. Then you're charged as an adult, and there may be more and serious crime, more and serious punishments that may follow that. But when you were when we were writing, we didn't think about that because, of course, we thought that we would never get caught. I mean, that's just one of the I guess mindsets when you are doing graffiti. You just never think that you will get caught because you always think that you are more intelligent than the people who are trying to catch you. And majority of the time it was done at night, so that changes the visibility factor. Also, quickness and how fast you were also plays a factor in that. So if you ever saw someone write graffiti or do graffiti or write his name in a book or whatever, it's always in a fast motion. So that just comes from, well, you have very little time to write your name or to do something, so you have to adjust to your surroundings, and you also have to be fast because of a second later or more time being in that situation can get you caught.
Did you or any of your crew members get caught?
Well, I considered having a successful graffiti career. I've never been caught before. There are other people who can say that, and there's some people who can't say that. So, yeah, just it's just how it is, and then the ones who were caught, it's not looked upon as, oh, you got caught, you did something wrong. It just, you just got caught, and we just kind of looked at it as you just got caught. It wasn't a big thing as far as, oh, you failed, or you did this, or you did something wrong, or it was just part of the game.
But I've heard from some writers, they were describing their own experience, but other people that they knew who got caught, like the best thing that could happen to you if you got caught was that you got charged with a misdemeanor as a minor.
Right.
But more often than not, the police knew that you weren't going to get in very much trouble, so
Right.
they would just rough you up instead. I mean, did that happen to people that you knew?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, of course. They may take you to a rival gang area, or they may drive you to a specific location, leave you out far away from your house or from wherever you were from, and let you get back home however you can get back home. So yeah, there were situations like that. There's a lot of stories that'll be in a whole nother separate hour-long, 3-hour-long interview. But yes, it did happen. It did happen often. Once again, it was something that was part of the game, and you just hope that you just didn't get caught, because there's a chance that may happen.
I think I'm going to switch gears here for a second, but one of the things that I think lots of people that don't know much about hip hop culture or specifically about sort of graffiti writing culture was just how diverse the kids were that were doing it. They came from everywhere, came from every kind of background. They were rich and they were poor. They were men. They were boys and girls, men and women.
Exactly.
Tell me a bit about the diversity of the people that you saw in Chicago. Like, was the crew that you hung out with diverse? Like, what was that like?
One thing that I can say is this, that it crossed a lot of racial lines, so we didn't see each other as, oh, that's another black writer or black graffiti artist, or we didn't say, oh, that was a Mexican graffiti artist or a white writer. We just saw it as, oh, he's a writer or he's a graffiti artist. So it did break down a lot of barriers because of Chicago being segregated. A lot of people didn't cross certain lines or go into specific neighborhoods because of their race or nationality. Maybe you went to a location, different location because you had to, but a lot of it crossed lines, and we embraced that, and we didn't see it as oh, well, that's an all-white crew or that's an all-black crew. If it happened to be that way, then it just happened to be that way. But when I was in high school, it was pretty much a mixed high school. So in my crew at the time, there were some Polish guys that were in the crew. There were Latino guys, some black guys, and we would all meet, and then we would meet with other crews. And even at an all-city meeting, we would see just every nationality. So we didn't really see it as, the word race and nationality didn't really come up when you really talk about graffiti in that sense, or how we talked about it, or how we saw another person. We just saw them as, oh, that's another graffiti writer, or that's another person in my crew, or that's a person in the other crew. We didn't see it as, oh, you know what, we can't go over here, or that person can't join the crew because he is this. If there were other things that prevented you from being in the crew, there were things that you did that, well, you can get into a crew, but race was definitely not one of them.
When you would see, other than some of the documentaries, I think pretty well captured the diversity of the people that were inside the movement, but like on popular television or the news or movies, it was almost exclusively black, it was almost exclusively male.
Yeah.
Two questions about that. Why do you think that was? And do you think that depiction as young, black, and male had something to do with the way that popular culture thought of graffiti as gang affiliated or criminal or with blight?
That could be part of it. As far as, I'm trying to picture myself as an outside person, so if I'm looking in, it could be that someone views that as, oh, okay, well, here's this gang issue or here's this criminal element. Let's just tag this other issue along with majority of the other problems as this being a black problem. So it could just be another issue and someone else just checking off another problem as, okay, this is a black problem, or this is a gang problem. So when you see or hear certain words, keywords, those are I would say trigger words. They trigger a certain response or a certain thought. So if you are from the outside in, and if you're reading an article, or if you're looking at TV and you say, oh, well, wow, majority of the rappers are black, and then, well, what goes along with that? Okay, well, they're talking about a specific subject, or these subjects that may have crime that are involved. So, well, if someone is seeing that and reading that, oh, obviously that must be true, then it confirms that in someone's mind if they're looking from the outside in. As far as being dominated by men or boys, I guess it's just one of those things that just happen to be dominated by men and boys, or male. There are females that are involved in hip hop or involved in graffiti. At some point, you have to be an artist before you become a graffiti writer or a graffiti artist. So there are female writers and female graffiti artists that are out there, but it's just one of those kind of unexplained things about it. Just happens to be more males in this specific thing versus females.
Yeah, but there were quite a few women or girl writers. I mean, not the majority or anything, but quite a few in the Chicago scene early on.
Yeah, there were a couple of them. There's still some out there. But one thing that made me think is that you would never know that unless you know that person. So if I were to see a person's name on the wall, maybe they may have a female sounding name, or maybe they don't. But if I don't know that person directly, there's no way for me to know whether or not, oh, that's a male or female. Even by style or content or whatever, maybe what they're putting up on a wall may have somewhat of a sign that they may be a female writer, but majority of the time, if you're just driving or if you're just seeing graffiti on the wall, you will probably never know, okay, well, that's a female writer, unless she has a name that's sort of feminine. Other than that,
Barbara or Eva.
right, exactly. Other than that, you will just never know, because it's just something that is. There are a majority of men who are involved, and that's pretty much the mindset. So, that's what you're going to think when you see something on the wall. So
with your own crew, which was pretty sort of diverse, I mean, I think that the crew has kind of an interesting power within the graffiti movement that's really unique and very cool. I mean, why were the crews so important to you? What was the name of your crew? Were you in more than one? Like, how did the politics between the crews work? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was in a couple of crews. My first crew was Pin 1, Public Enemy Number 1. So that started off as a writing crew. So I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it. It could be a writing crew, or it could be a crew that does something that's more artistic. But for the most part, majority of Chicago crews started off as writing crews. So we were just writers, so just a group of us where we would just write. And then later on it kind of progressed to, oh, now you're become a graffiti artist crew, or what you're doing is more artistic versus just writing your name. But what the crew does, it just shows unity. And if you are at war with another crew, it's just part of the game of getting your name up more. So if I have 5 or 6 people in my crew and I want that crew to shine, then it automatically increases the chances of winning, or just having that crew, the crew's name out there more versus if I was a solo person, which means I was probably not in a crew, which means that I may not get up more. It's just I have to work twice as hard, triple, 5 times as harder as someone who has a crew or someone that's involved in a crew. So it's just, unity, having strength in numbers, the more chances of your name and your crew's name getting up more, which was part of the game. Let's see who can get up the most.
Yeah. All right, so I've been to a few of your shows.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen quite a bit of your previous work.
Right.
I've even seen some of your work on the trains. I know you have this love-hate relationship with the CTA. What is with the fixation on the train?
Well, of course, the love-hate relationship with the CTA comes from me being a graffiti writer, so that was pretty much, if not the only way to get your name across on a massive scale. So, like I was saying before, I can stay in one specific area, or if I wanted my name to travel, that was the only way that we had to do. The only way, and one of the main reasons of the major vehicles of getting your name out and for other people to see it, other graffiti writers or graffiti artists to see it. So that's where the fascination comes in, is because I was using the transit system for another means, which means I have touched on another level. My personal level is beyond just, I need to go to work, or I need to go from here to here, I need to take the bus, or I need to take the train to go to a certain area, which the average rider is just, that's the only connection that they have with the transit system. They just use it for means of transportation. But graffiti writers and myself, we have another level of knowledge and another connection. So we have used it in a different way besides normal. So that's where the connection comes in at. So that's why a majority of my work relates to the transit system, because of what I did in the past. So it's just this natural progression. And as an artist, I'm doing something that I know. So that way, when I'm being interviewed or someone is asking me questions about my work, it's coming from an experience. It's coming from the truth. It's coming from me. I don't have to research a specific subject matter and then create work and then have to research the subject matter more so I know what to say when someone asks me about it. So I automatically know because there's that direct connection. So I think as an artist, I think that's very important that you're able to talk about your work, express it, and it's coming from an experience, not something that's made up or something that's fabricated or something that I can't explain, or I have to research or I have to go online to look at this subject and now I can talk about it. So it's something that I'm comfortable with. And even before graffiti, I was using the transit system for a long period of time. Even I remember being on the train with my mother, being on the bus. My mother, at a very young age, even I can describe the green bus seats, the long, some people may call them bucket seats. They didn't have dividers in between. They were green and cushioned, pretty thick cushion, about this thick. The windows were oval, pretty much, and they would slide open. Yeah. Sometimes they were broken and people would kick them open or something. So all those things I could relate to, and all those things that I could use in my artwork. The writing is just another way and it's just another subject matter that I use a lot. But it's pretty much everything that I have experienced being on the transit system.
Yeah, I mean, I understand especially early on, the fascination with the trains, because that was how, when you got your name up,
right,
that was how you got it around, all around the city. I get that, but it's still this sort of theme, even when you move indoors and you're putting things on canvases,
right.
Like there's still this theme. It's this muse. So anyway, I guess I'll never fully understand it. I get it a bit, and I get where the love comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But where's the hate come from? Like you've always said, I got this love and hate relationship. Where's the hate part come from?
Well, I guess I can say the hate comes from the system not working 100%, or the changes that have occurred throughout the whole transit system. And these are all different times. I remember the Lake Dan Ryan line shut down for 2 years, and on the Lake Dan Ryan, the lakeside is predominantly all black. Okay, and then at the time, the Dan Ryan side is predominantly all black. So the lakeside of having the train system closed down for 2 years, I mean, has a huge impact on the neighborhood. Even though it was for the improvement or just to make necessary repairs by the system being over 100 years, but to a person who doesn't understand that or doesn't see the bigger picture, it's more of a question of, well, how am I going to get to work now? Okay, I can't get to work, then I can't do this, I can't make progress, I can't pay this, I can't do this. So that's just one issue. So that's where that comes in at. So those are the issues that that have impacted the neighborhood or a person or a group on a very high level, and not just, oh, well, I can just take another route or whatever. I mean, these changes and have impacted people. And when you cut out the night service, well, if someone is working third shift, then how are they going to get to work now? So then there's all these issues that follow that. So that's where that comes in. That's where that, quote, hate comes in at. But now what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to get people to see the beauty behind the CTA, behind the transit system, and just to get the people to see it the way I'm seeing it. So of course the average person uses the CTA for one reason, is just a means of transportation. But if you look and the changes that they're making, the improvements, the stations that are redone, there's design elements that are being implemented, and just to see it in a whole nother different light. So that's my path right now. Yeah, I think it's an interesting evolution in your own development as an artist, and in what you're looking at and exploring. But it's also interesting to be able to see you react to the same muse or the same medium over a long period of time. Right. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Speaking of your evolution as an artist, why was it important for you to go pursue a degree and study art in college? Why did you want to get into that? And related to that, how did your experience as an artist in public prepare you or change the way you look at going to school for art?
Okay. My first art school was the Art Institute of Chicago, so that was a very, very good school. It's a fine art school. So I wanted to make progress. I wanted to learn techniques, and that's something that I wanted to learn. I wanted to advance. Of course, you can learn those things on your own. You can go to an art store, experiment, and grab whatever medium that you need to, and just experiment for hours and hours and hours. But when you're in a school setting, there's just something about that. You're learning first. You're learning from a professional or someone who's had a lot of experience in a specific medium or within that art realm or art world that you're trying to touch or that you're trying to contact. I went to 2 more other schools, but I graduated with a BFA from Columbia, and it was in advertising, so it was completely separate and completely different from fine art. So I wanted to get both sides. I wanted to understand fine art, and I wanted to understand commercial art. There's a fine line, and then there's distance between them. It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
In commercial art, you were taught techniques as far as methods of certain materials, and you're learning computer applications. You're learning portfolio development, presentation, presenting your work, speaking in front of the class, giving critiques, taking critiques, and not get personal about it.